hunger beneath the floorboards. The first thing you notice when you leave the city is the smell of the air. In Phnom Penh, the air smells of diesel fumes, fried noodles, and the hot dust that settles on everything. But out here, in my grandmother's village near Kampong Chnang, the air is thick and alive. It smells of damp earth, of rain that fell an hour ago, of sweet jasmine flowers my yai plants by the stairs, and of the slow, patient decay of the jungle that is always trying to reclaim the land. It's a smell I've always associated with peace. Now, it is the smell I associate with fear. I had come back for Pichum Ben, the Festival of the Dead, like I did every year. A week away from my graphic design job, away from the constant noise of traffic and construction, to honor the ancestors and to see my grandmother. Yai was the anchor of our family, a tiny woman with a spine made of river reeds, flexible but impossible to break. Her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, each line telling a story I was only just beginning to learn. The house was the same as it had always been, a traditional wooden house on tall stilts, designed to weather the floods of the wet season. The floorboards were worn smooth by generations of bare feet. The air beneath the house, where the chickens pecked and the dogs slept in the shade, was always cool and smelled of dry soil. During the day, sunlight would filter through the cracks in the floor, painting shifting patterns on the dirt below. It was a place of memories, of comfort. But things change. And sometimes, the places you feel safest are the ones that have been hiding the deepest shadows. The first night it began. I was lying on my thin mattress on the floor, the mosquito net a pale, ghostly box around me. The sounds of the village were settling down for the night. The last of the motos had sputtered home. The chorus of geckos and cicadas had reached its familiar, hypnotic rhythm. The night air hung thick and sweet with the smell of overripe jackfruit from the tree outside and the dying incense from the family altar. It was a perfect, peaceful Cambodian night. And then I heard it. It started low, a guttural moan from directly beneath the floorboards where I lay. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't the groaning of old wood. It was a sound of cavernous emptiness, a hollow ache given voice. It made the bamboo walls of my room shudder, not with force, but with a kind of sympathetic vibration, as if the house itself felt the pain of that sound. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, my breath caught in my throat. The moan was punctuated by something else, something far worse, a high, desperate whistling. It was the sound of an immense hunger trying to draw breath through a pinhole, a frantic, wheezing inhalation that spoke of a need so profound it was suffocating. Moan and then whistle, a gut-deep sorrow, followed by a piercing, desperate need. My eyes darted to the small family altar in the corner of the main room. Yai had left an offering before bed, as she always did. A small bowl of white rice, a piece of fried river fish, and a cup of tea. In the moonlight filtering through the window, I could see the offering trembling. The whole ceramic bowl was vibrating in time with that awful sound from below. A faint steam was rising from the food, but it wasn't the steam of heat. It was a pale, gray mist being pulled downwards, siphoned away into the suffocating darkness under the house. Its very essence was being consumed. I looked towards my grandmother's sleeping area, separated from mine by a thin curtain. She wasn't moving. I could hear her soft, shallow breathing. She had to have heard it. The sound was a physical presence in the room, but she remained still. As the moaning ebbed away, I heard her whisper, a tiny thread of sound into the rough silk of her pillow. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was a prayer, but it sounded like an apology, a familiar penance for a sorrow too large to ever be fed. That was the first night, and I, in my modern city-dweller ignorance, tried to tell myself it was just a dream. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of rice porridge, or bobber, simmering with ginger and chicken. Yai was already up, moving about the kitchen with a slowness I hadn't noticed before. Her face seemed grayer, the lines around her eyes deeper. "Did you sleep well, Aun?" she asked, her voice soft. "Aun, little brother, that's what she always called me." I had a strange dream, Yai," I said, deciding to test the waters. "I thought I heard something under the house." Her hand, stirring the porridge, paused for a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She didn't look at me. "The old wood groans," she said simply. "The wind plays tricks at night. This house is old. It has many voices." She ladled the bobber into a bowl and handed it to me. Her hand was trembling slightly. I looked at the family altar. The bowl of rice from last night was still there, but it looked wrong. The rice was dry and gray, as if it had been sitting out in the sun for a week, not a single night. The piece of fish was a shrunken, papery husk. All the life had been leached from it. "Yai," I started, "the offering." "The ancestors were hungry," she cut me off, her tone leaving no room for argument. She turned her back to me and began washing the pot with a sudden, fierce energy. I spent the day trying to shake off the unease. I walked through the village, said hello to familiar faces, and watched the children playing games with bottle caps in the dirt. Everything was normal. The sun was hot, the palm trees swayed, the water buffalo soaked lazily in the muddy ponds. I told myself I was just being a city boy, spooked by the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside. But the memory of that sound, that hollow moan and that desperate, whistling breath, was like a fishbone caught in my throat. I began to watch my grandmother more closely. I noticed things I had overlooked before, how she never went down the stairs after dusk, how she would sometimes stop in the middle of a task and stare at the floorboards, her expression a mixture of pity and dread. And the offerings, they were getting larger. What used to be a small bowl of rice became a heaping plate. A single piece of fish became 2, then 3. She was cooking more food for the altar than she was for the 2 of us. The second night, the sounds came again, louder. The moan was deeper, resonating up through the mattress and into my bones. The whistling was more frantic, more insistent. This time, I didn't stay in bed. I crept to the window that overlooked the space beneath the house. It was pitch black down there, a void that seemed to swallow the moonlight. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A cold spot in the humid night air, a palpable presence of need, of bottomless, eternal hunger. I saw a flicker of movement near the base of one of the stilts. It wasn't a dog or a chicken. It was a shadow that seemed to deepen the darkness around it, a piece of night that was blacker than the rest. It shifted, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw the outline of a grotesquely thin, elongated human form hunched over on the ground. But as soon as I focused on it, it was gone. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was not the wind. This was not old wood. This house was not just old. My grandmother had said it had voices. I was beginning to think one of those voices belonged to something that should have stayed silent. Something that was living or unliving right beneath our feet. The next day, I knew I couldn't just let it go. Yai was getting weaker. Dark circles like bruises were forming under her eyes. She moved like a woman carrying an immense, invisible weight. She was feeding it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew she was feeding it, and I suspected it wasn't just with rice and fish. It was feeding on her energy, her life force. I decided to visit the local wat, the pagoda. Perhaps one of the older monks would know something about the history of this land or this house. As I walked, I noticed how the other villagers treated our home. They were friendly to me, but their eyes would always skim past the house itself, as if not wanting to look at it too closely. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes when they asked how my grandmother was doing. The house was known. The house was feared. Our home was what the old folks called T'Changan, heavy, weighed down by something unseen. At the wat, I found an elderly monk sweeping leaves near the main vihara. His name was Laun Savan, and he had known my grandmother since they were children. I offered him my respects, and after some pleasantries, I found the courage to ask. "Venerable Savan," I said, "I have been hearing strange things at my grandmother's house." He stopped sweeping and looked at me. His eyes were kind, but held a deep, ancient sadness. "Your grandmother is a good woman, Rith," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She carries a burden heavier than any stone." "A burden? What burden? What is that sound I hear at night? The sound from under the floor?" The monk sighed and leaned on his broom. "Some hungers cannot be filled," he said, his gaze distant. "Some ghosts are not born of malice, but of a sorrow so deep it tethers them to the earth. They are called pret, hungry ghosts. They have mouths as small as the eye of a needle and bellies as large as mountains. They are cursed to wander, forever starving, forever thirsty, for the sins of their past life." "A pret," I whispered, the word feeling cold on my tongue. I had heard the stories as a child, morality tales to scare us into being generous and not greedy. I never thought they were real. But this one, the monk continued, looking back towards the direction of my grandmother's house. This one is different. It is not bound by its own sins. It is bound by a promise made and a promise broken during a time of unimaginable suffering. He then told me a story from the dark times, from the years of the Khmer Rouge, a time when starvation was a weapon and families were torn apart. My grandmother, he explained, had a younger brother. His name was Sokol. He was just a boy, maybe 10 years old, with big eyes and an even bigger smile. During the worst of the famine, when they were forced to work in the fields from before sunrise to after sunset on a single spoonful of watery rice gruel, Sokol grew weak. One day, my grandmother, who was barely a teenager herself, managed to hide a small, hard ball of rice, her entire portion for the day. She promised Sokol she would give it to him that night, when no one was looking. It would be enough, she hoped, to give him a little strength. But that evening, a guard patrolled their barracks. Yai was terrified. If she was caught with the rice, they would both be killed. She clutched the small, precious ball in her fist, her knuckles white, and waited. Sokol lay on the bamboo platform next to her, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on her hand. He didn't speak. He just watched, his hunger a silent, desperate plea. The guard took a long time to pass. Yai was frozen with fear. She prayed for him to leave. By the time he was gone and she finally dared to move, it was too late. Sokol's eyes were still open, still fixed on her hand, but the light had gone out of them. He had died of starvation, waiting for a promise that fear had prevented her from keeping. She buried him herself, the monk said, his voice barely a whisper. With that ball of rice still clutched in her hand, she has carried that guilt ever since. When she was finally able to return to this village, to the land where their family home once stood, his spirit followed her. Not out of anger, but out of need. The boy who died of hunger is still hungry, and your grandmother, bound by her love and her guilt, has been feeding him ever since. My blood ran cold. The moaning, the whistling, it was the sound of a starving child. A child who had been starving for over 40 years. The sorrow too large to ever be fed was not just his hunger. It was my grandmother's grief. I walked back to the house in a daze. The world seemed different, the colors muted. The familiar chirping of birds sounded like cries of pain. Every shadow seemed to hold a thin, starving form. I was no longer just scared. I was heartbroken. The monster under my bed was my great uncle. When I entered the house, Yai was sitting on the floor, meticulously arranging an offering. It was enormous. A whole steamed fish, a pyramid of rice, several kinds of fruit, cakes, and cups of sweet tea. It was a feast, enough for a dozen people. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like a priestess preparing for a sacred, terrible ritual. Yai, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know about Sokol. She froze, her whole body went rigid. Slowly, she turned to look at me. Her face, which I had always seen as a symbol of strength, was now just a mask of pure, unadulterated pain. The dam of her silence, held for decades, finally broke. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. He was so small, Rith, she sobbed, her voice cracking. He never cried, he just watched me. He trusted me, and I failed him, I let him starve. This is my karma. This is the debt I must pay. You can't keep doing this, I pleaded, gesturing to the feast, to her own frail body. Look at you, it's killing you, Yai, you're feeding it your own life. It is all I have left to give him, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floorboards. Tonight is the anniversary, the night he left. His hunger is always worst on this night. This offering must be enough. It has to be enough. I knew then that I couldn't stop her. This was her penance, her ritual. The only way she knew how to atone for a choice no child should ever have to make. I could only bear witness. As dusk fell, a suffocating silence descended upon the house. The usual night sounds of the jungle were absent. No geckos, no cicadas. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Yai lit sticks of incense, filling the room with a thick, cloying smoke. She knelt before the altar, her hands clasped in prayer, her lips moving silently. I sat on my mattress, my back against the wall, watching, waiting. The air grew cold, the humid warmth of the day completely vanishing. And then it began. The moan from beneath the house was no longer a sound of simple sorrow. It was a roar of agony, a sound like a collapsing cave that shook the very foundations of the house. The floorboards vibrated so violently that the cups on the table rattled and danced. And the whistling, it wasn't the sound of breathing through a pinhole anymore. It was a high, frantic shriek, the sound of 1,000 empty lungs trying to draw in the entire world, a vortex of pure, insatiable need. It drilled into my ears, into my skull. I looked at the offering, the feast. The steam rising from it was no longer a faint mist. It was a thick gray torrent being pulled down through the cracks in the floor, the food visibly deflated. The pyramid of rice sank in on itself. The plump fruits shriveled into withered husks in a matter of seconds. The whole steamed fish curled and turned to a dry, brown shell. The essence, the very concept of nourishment, was being violently inhaled by the starving void below. The house groaned under the strain. I could feel the spiritual pressure, an immense weight pressing down, trying to crush us. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed by a terror so absolute it felt holy. Through the smoke, I saw my grandmother. She hadn't moved. She was still kneeling, her eyes closed, tears streaming down her face as she offered up her penance, her life, her love, to the endless hunger of her brother. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. It was a dead silence, a vacuum. The house gave a final shudder and then settled. The offering on the altar was a plate of dust and husks. The air was still cold. My grandmother slumped forward, catching herself with her hands on the floor. She was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. I scrambled over to her, helping her sit up. She was as light as a bundle of dry sticks. Her skin was cold and clammy. She looked at me, her eyes barely able to focus. A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "He is quiet," she whispered, her voice a thread of air. "For now. I have been here for 3 months now. I couldn't bring myself to go back to Phnom Penh. My job, my apartment, my city life, it all seems like a dream I had a long time ago. My grandmother is still with me, but she is a shadow of the woman she was. She spends most of her days sleeping, her strength gone. And so, the duty has fallen to me. Every evening, I am the one who prepares the offering. Rice, fish, sometimes a piece of fruit. I place it on the altar, light the incense, and say a prayer. A prayer not just for the ancestors, but for a small boy named Sokol. A prayer for his peace, and a prayer for my grandmother's forgiveness. And every night, I lie awake in the dark under my mosquito net, and I listen. I listen to the old house groan. I listen to the night sounds of the village slowly return. And I wait for the low, guttural moan to start up from beneath the floorboards. I wait for the desperate, high-pitched whistle of a hunger that can never be filled. It is quieter now. My offerings, my energy, they are enough for the moment, but I can feel it. The sorrow is still there, soaked into the very dirt beneath this house. The hunger is patient. It is eternal. I have come to understand that my grandmother was not just feeding a ghost. She was containing it, and now that burden is mine. So if you ever find yourself in an old house in the Cambodian countryside, and you hear a sound from beneath the floor at night, do not dismiss it as the wind. Do not tell yourself it is just the groaning of old wood. Say a prayer for the souls who may be trapped by the sorrows of the past, and be thankful that it is not your door or your floor that they are scratching at. Be thankful that it is not your name they are whispering, in a voice made of nothing but unending, desperate need.